Dead Man Rising, a memoir of trauma, grace, and becoming, written and narrated by Shiloh. For those who have walked through fire, for those still stuck in the shadows, for the addicted, the afflicted, the abandoned, for the ones who think they've gone too far, this story is for you. Dead man walking, the darkness once declared, but there is another voice, and it says, Dead Man Rising. Preface. To the one who still breathes. There was a time I didn't want to live, not just in a passing depressed sense, but in the deep, silent way a soul starts to shut down long before the heart stops beating. Ignorant to the fact that I was predisposed to PTSD and lacking in sufficient coping skills, I had seen too much. The blood, the screams, the despair, the silence afterwards. And eventually, I became one of the casualties, one of the walking wounded, a dead man still breathing. This isn't a book about how I got my life together. This is a story about being found in the ruins, about being spoken to, not by a therapist or a preacher, but by a voice that somehow met me right where I was, in my car, high on meth, suicidal, ashamed, wrecked. That voice, gentle, wise, and holy, called me back to life. Slowly, it reformed me. It fathered me. It healed me from the inside out. I didn't write this to be known or admired. I wrote it because there are still others like me, maybe you, whose lights are flickering in the dark. And if that's you, I want you to know you're not crazy, you're not beyond reach, and you are not alone. This is my story, not of perfect recovery or a clean path, but of sacred detours and humble learning. It's a journey through PTSD, addiction, shame, and grief, into the awareness of compassion and unconditional acceptance that allows healing, a healing power that I refer to as Christ. This internal, loving, and healing power has been referred to by many other names in various cultures at various times throughout human history. But it isn't about a name. It's about a spirit that is still alive, still speaking, and still resurrecting. So if the voice in your head speaks something similar to the phrase, dead man walking, keep reading. There is another voice, and it says, Dead Man Rising. Chapter 1. Dead Man Walking. Dead Man Walking. I remembered this phrase from the 1999 film, The Green Mile. A prison guard would shout it out as a man walked towards his death, toward the electric chair. And now I was hearing it again. Not from a movie, not from a prison, but from within my own mind. Dead man walking, that's who I had become. I walked into a live-in rehabilitation center in Los Angeles. This facility and its program had been structured to treat individuals who were dealing with PTSD and addiction. I wasn't there for healing. That word felt too soft, too optimistic. I was there because I was already dead, on the inside, and I needed a resurrection. The years leading up to that moment were drenched in death. Not metaphorical death, real death. I was a deputy sheriff. Like many of my fellow brothers and sisters in the various fields of serving humanity, I witnessed and experienced things that no human soul was designed to carry. Women with crushed faces, children trembling in blood-stained clothes, A man slumped in his car with a bullet in his head while his fiancée screamed and held his body. Blood on walls, screams echoing in my memory. These weren't just memories. They were movies that played on repeat, whether I was awake or asleep. I saw friends die too, brothers in uniform, one with half his skull gone. I can still see the puddle of reddish purple underneath his beautiful head. One burned in his cruiser, my best friend. I can still hear their last calls. There was no past tense to these things. There was no memory. There was only reliving. I tried to be the strong one, the communicator, the guy who always knew what to say, but I couldn't find the words to speak to my own soul. I couldn't reach the places inside me that were screaming. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. And eventually, the destruction spread like fire. Divorce, losing custody of my son, losing my badge, losing my identity. I remember driving to the gym, which at one time was like a second home, but I would fall asleep in the parking lot, unable to get out of the car, overwhelmed with the heaviness of depression. I was being swallowed by the darkness. I started using pills at first, prescribed, to manage physical pain as well as the psychological overload. Pill use turned into cocaine, then later, meth. Then nothing made sense anymore. My passions died, my dreams withered. After one of many psychological evaluations, one psychologist wrote next to my diagnosis, "Prognosis, very unlikely." They were probably right. I was diagnosed and within a year had been hospitalized twice for suicide attempts and placed on psychiatric holds. About a year after losing my career, I was using meth daily. It wasn't about getting high. It was about escaping. Escaping this life, escaping the scenes in my head, escaping the hell that nobody else could see. Hell wasn't a place I feared after death. I was already living in it. Hell had a voice. Its darkness was blinding to the mind, only offering visuals of flashbacks, isolation, and torment that felt like fire. My only prayer, whispered over and over through clenched teeth and silent tears, was this: God, please, somehow save me. I don't even know if I believed he would, but I begged anyway. But then, a few years later, on a cold day in February, I walked through the doors of my first rehabilitation experience. I didn't know how I got there, not really. It felt like I had been divinely guided by invisible grace. The other tenants looked at me with a stare that revealed their shock and concern, like they could see the years of death and pain that I carried. My posture, my silence, my heaviness, it all screamed what I couldn't say. Dead man walking. And that was the voice that I heard in my head. It hissed in my mind, mocking and final. I wasn't convinced I could be brought back. But I was there. And that was the beginning. Chapter 2. The Voice. Something began to change inside me. Not all at once, but unmistakably. It was quiet at first, like the faint crackling of a fire in the distance or a whisper carried on the wind. It was a voice, but not one that I was familiar with, and certainly not one I expected. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but it was different. The thoughts came with a wisdom and compassion I didn't have within me. My drug-crazed brain was incapable of thinking such clear thoughts. These words weren't mine. They were too calm, too steady, too holy. And they spoke back, not out loud, but in response to my internal anguish, like someone was answering my pain in real time. This voice didn't condemn me, it didn't shame me, it didn't shout. It spoke like a compassionate father to a terrified child, with calm, with mercy, with knowledge of who I truly was beneath the wreckage. I was still using meth when I first heard it, still struggling, still broken, and yet it spoke to me as if I were already clean, as if I were already loved, as if I were already home. I began to cry, hard, not because of guilt, but because of the kindness, the nearness, the truth in the tone. It broke through the fortress of numbness I had built around my heart, and something in me began to open. This was the beginning of my resurrection, not in circumstance, but in awareness. The voice showed me new ways of thinking. It would gently expose a belief I had held on to, one rooted in fear or trauma, and then quietly offer a different perspective, a higher view. It fathered me in the very places where I had been spiritually orphaned. For years, I had been trained in tactics, how to fight, how to shoot, how to drive under pressure, how to talk down the suicidal and confront the violent. But I had never learned how to be still. I had never been taught how to listen for a spiritual whisper in the middle of a storm. But now I was learning, because the voice was always present, even in the dirt, even in the sweat and nightmares and shame, even while I was high, especially then. I've come to know this voice as my internal teacher and guide. Based on my cultural upbringing, I understand this loving spirit to be the philosophical yet living spirit of Christ. Not the one I learned about in textbooks, not the one many of us have heard about in impersonal sermons, but a spirit and depth of consciousness that cannot be claimed or owned by any one religion. This subtle and internal spirit is not distant. It is the voice that speaks from within. It is the stillness in chaos. It is the one who sits beside the addict in a car at 3 a.m. and says, "I'm not going anywhere." And that voice did more than comfort me. It began forming me into something new, into something true, not into a perfect person, but into someone aligned with the image of vulnerable and fearless compassion. Chapter 3, Rehab. It felt like a miracle just to arrive. The location I had been divinely guided to was a live-in rehabilitation center, specifically for people like me, those who had served society and carried the weight of trauma until it broke them. I walked in on February 23rd, 2020. That date is etched in me now, the beginning of my return. I didn't arrive with hope. I arrived because there was nowhere else to go. When I entered the building, I could feel the eyes on me. Not judgmental, just aware. People who'd been there before saw the way that I walked, the way I didn't look up. They could see the weight I carried just by the slump of my shoulders, by how my eyes didn't focus. They recognized it because they had carried it too. And inside my head, the mocking voice still echoed, "Dead man walking." At first, I went through the motions. I kept my guard up. Decades of training and trauma had conditioned me to hide anything vulnerable. But something started to shift, fast. Within the first 2 weeks, I found myself in tear-soaked, soul-wrenching group sessions. I heard others speak of horrors I thought only I had seen. There was a strange kind of healing in the rawness. No masks, no pretending, just wounded people telling the truth. And then I experienced something I never expected. EMDR therapy. I had no idea how deeply this technique would reach into the trauma that had frozen my nervous system. In a session, the psychiatrist guided me through bilateral eye movements while I recalled a memory, and something cracked open. Memories I had been trapped in began to lose some of their oppressive power. They didn't disappear, but there was a shift. I was no longer in them. I was sensing the release of the emotions that had imprisoned me in these horror stories. And then something happened that hadn't happened in nearly a decade. I slept. Not just numbed out unconsciousness, but rest. Real rest. No screaming, no sweat-soaked sheets, no fists swinging in the dark. Just silence. Just sleep. The onslaught of nightmares began to decline. It was the beginning of life breaking through the concrete of despair. In that strange and sacred space, I laughed again. I laughed with other men and women, some of whom had lost more than I had, some still in the storm. We cracked jokes, and I started to remember what it felt like to be human. Not a shell, not a ghost, but a person. I went to an outdoor yoga session, one of the more unexpected parts of recovery, and as I lay on my back, reaching my hands toward the sky, the sun wrapped around them like a halo. And in that moment, I heard a new voice. Not the voice of death, not the old voice that had haunted me. This one spoke with clarity and certainty. Dead man rising. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a prophecy, a turning point, a rebirth. This wasn't just about therapy, or drugs, or sleep. This was the miracle I had prayed for, begged for, even cursed for. It had begun quietly. It had begun with the voice and continued in the presence of strangers, in group therapy, in silent yoga sessions. It had begun in rehabilitative therapy through people who showed up with love, through professionals who refused to give up on the very unlikely ones like me. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was the first sign that the story wasn't over. Chapter 4. Dead Man Rising. For a long time, I didn't believe in resurrection, not the kind that happens in this life. I believed in pain, I believed in trauma, I believed in slow death, and I lived it. But that day in the grass at a yoga session with my hands stretched to the sky, something happened. The sun wrapped itself around my fingers, warm and golden. I wasn't praying. I wasn't performing. I was just lying there, open. And that's when the voice returned. It didn't whisper this time. It spoke with quiet authority, clear, strong, familiar. Dead man rising. The same inner voice that had spoken into my crazed mind, the one that met me in the darkness, rage, and despair, the one that spoke to me while I was still using, still broken, was now speaking a new destiny over me. It didn't call me by my failures. It didn't call me by my past. It called me by my becoming. That phrase marked the turning point, not just in circumstance, but in identity. I was not just a man recovering from addiction, not just a veteran of trauma, not just a failed marriage, a lost career, and a wounded soul. I was someone rising. From that point forward, everything in me began to slowly align with that truth. Not perfectly, not instantly, but faithfully. The therapy helped. The support from others mattered deeply. But it was that inner change, that shift in who I believed I was, that gave breath back to my soul. The voice never asked me to perform for God or join a religion. It invited me to become like it, to be formed not into a religious caricature, but into the image of a higher nature. the nature of Christ with attributes such as vulnerability, compassion, wisdom, gentleness, strength without domination, truth without condemnation. This slow formation did not erase my pain, but it began to transfigure it. My suffering wasn't a disqualification, it became sacred ground. Christ, the abiding spirit within us, met me in my pain, not after it. This internal spirit of love didn't wait for my meth pipe to drop or my nightmares to stop. It walked in and sat beside me, unclean, shaking, ashamed, and it loved me there. That's the higher power I met, the one who resurrects slowly, who breathes life into places I thought were permanently dead, who calls souls out of their grave, not with thunder, but with mercy. And so I began to walk, not as a man who had arrived, but as a man rising. Dead man walking was a sentence. Dead man rising is a calling. Chapter 5. The Nature of Christ. Resurrection did not make me perfect. It made me aware. It awakened me to a new path, not of religious performance, but of being slowly shaped into a new kind of human, an individual formed from the inside out. This is what I've come to understand as the nature of Christ. I had heard that name most of my life, but it wasn't until the living voice spoke to me while I was in the streets, in the sweat and chaos of my trauma, that I began to know Christ, not as a doctrine, not as a distant deity, but as presence, as voice, as friend. This Christ was not a white-robed figure in a stained glass window. This Christ was the quiet spirit who sat with me while I was high, who didn't turn away from my filth, who answered my thoughts with wisdom greater than I could produce. This undeniably existing conscious spirit was the one who called me forward, not with guilt, but with compassion. This was the Christ who wept, who bled, who knew what it meant to suffer. And its call to me wasn't be better or do better. It was be like me. To become a new form of human, not just in belief, but in being, meant everything had to change. Not overnight, not in some polished way, but gradually, deeply, irrevocably. And most of the work was happening within. The fruit of this formation wasn't flashy. It looked like this: saying no to old patterns, not out of shame, but out of love for what I was becoming. Beginning to value integrity, even when no one was watching. Learning to listen more than I speak. Feeling the pain of others, not just as a trigger, but as an invitation to compassion. Choosing service over self-preservation. I didn't suddenly become wise or righteous. I became responsive. I wasn't being formed into a religious man. I was being formed into a whole human being. One who knew how to let go of ego without losing identity. One who could tell the truth about pain without being swallowed by it. One who could hold space for others without rescuing or fixing, just as this spirit of love had done for me. This became my new direction, to be shaped into the image of the one who lifted me from hell. And not just for my own healing, but so that others could rise too. Becoming like Christ isn't about arrival, it's about becoming over and over again. It's about letting the spirit that raises souls from their graves keep raising you. Chapter 6. Wounded Healer. There's a paradox I've come to live in. I am both a wounded man and a healer. Not because I have it all together, but because I have been to the bottom and I found something holy there. Or rather, something holy found me. That's why I've answered the call to start sharing the hope I've found. Currently, I'm on my way to becoming a life coach, but not just in the casual sense the title sometimes implies. My path hasn't been a weekend workshop or a motivational slogan. It's been a long, rigorous, and sacred journey, forged in trauma, refined through grace, and deepened through education. In the 5 years since my rehabilitation, I've earned a bachelor's degree in behavioral health science, and now I'm pursuing my master's in psychology. This academic work isn't just a credential, it's part of the transformation. I wanted to understand the mind that nearly destroyed me. I wanted to learn the languages of trauma, of neurobiology, of healing, not only to help others, but to honor what I lived through. There's a deep value in life coaching, and I don't take the title lightly. But what I offer comes from both within and beyond personal experience. It is being shaped through evidence-based practice, clinical insight, and an ethical responsibility to those I serve. It is, in truth, a sacred vocation. What makes this path meaningful to me isn't just that I survived, it's that I can now walk beside others who are still in the dark. I don't come to fix them, I come to sit with them, to see them, to hold space with presence and empathy, just as that subtle, loving, internal voice did for me. The healing I offer isn't mine, it's the overflow of what I've received. My pain has become a compass, my education has become a lamp, my faith has become a map. And together, they guide me in helping others navigate their own valleys. Carl Jung said, "Only the wounded physician heals." I believe that, but I would add, only the physician who continues to heal can be trusted to help others heal. I am still healing, still growing, and still becoming. And from that place of becoming, I serve. My wounds did not disqualify me, they prepared me. My training didn't replace my story, it gave it structure, language, and direction. And now I rise, not just as a survivor, but as a guide. Chapter 7, Hope for the Hopeless. If you've made it this far with me, then maybe, just maybe, there's still a flicker inside you. I know what it's like to sit in the dark, wondering if you'll ever feel anything again, besides fear or shame. I know the hollowness of a life that looks like survival on the outside, but feels like slow death on the inside. And I know the deafening silence when it seems like God and all hope of goodness have walked away. But I also know this: you are not alone, and this is not the end of your story. The voice of hopelessness, shame, trauma, and addiction, they're loud. They speak with false certainty. They call you names that aren't yours. They whisper that nothing will ever change. And I believed them for a long time, but they were wrong. There is another voice. It might come quietly at first, like a thought you don't expect. It may not use religious words or sound like anything you've been taught to trust. But when it comes, you'll know, because it won't accuse you. It will receive you. It won't shame you. It will sit with you. It won't demand perfection. It will speak the truth in love. That voice saved my life. It showed up in a rehab center, in yoga sessions, in EMDR therapy, even while I was still using. And over time, it called me by a new name: Dead Man Rising. If you hear anything from this book, hear this: you are not beyond reach, not too broken, not too far gone, not too dirty for grace and restoration. You may feel like a dead man walking, but the God of love, the Spirit deep within us all, still writes resurrection stories. You're allowed to believe again. You're allowed to hope again. You're allowed to become someone new, and you don't have to do it alone. The miracle you're waiting for may not look like lightning. It might look like the quiet arrival of breath, of a single night without nightmares, of a voice that says, "I'm not done with you yet." Epilogue. Listen carefully. I am about to do a new thing. Now it will spring forth. Will you not be aware of it? I will even put a road in the wilderness, rivers in the desert. O Eternal One, you know exactly who I am. You know when I sit and when I stand. You know my thoughts. You know what I'm going to say long before I say it. It is true, compassionate spirit within me, that you know everything and everyone. It is more than this mind can fully comprehend. Can I go anywhere and be apart from your spirit? Is there anywhere I can go to escape your faithful presence? Even when I am in the realm of the dead, you are there with me. Om.